I have some prepared remarks. I'm going to introduce some of my colleagues, and we'll give you a taste of what the show is aiming to become. So forgive me for using my text, but I will drift on if I don't. In July of last year, I got a FedEx package from Lynn and Stephen containing CDs of the score of Knoxville, performed valiantly by the two of them, as well as a first draft in which song titles and lyrics were placed where the composer and lyricist felt the songs belonged. After a couple of days to absorb it all, finally I sent an email. This is so pretentious. I mean, I'm quoting myself. I have been so here's my email. I have been so moved and inspired by the lyrics and demo you sent that days have passed and I have not adequately expressed my joy and excitement. It seems to me you have opened a vein in the story, and the result is an emotional fullness matching the expressiveness of A.G.'s prose. I can feel the show itself taking shape, making tentative first steps, finding its way in a theatrical mode. What is so personal, so intimate in A.G.'s narrative, what feels almost like a whisper in the reader's ear, is actually present in these plain spoken images and joyous melodies. These tunes choir among themselves long after. Hill beyond hill, beyond hill, beyond hill in Tennessee. I also feel you have found the musical key that opens the door of the story. Now, I'm wondering if my dear friends Lynn and Stephen would be willing to pop up here for a moment, and if they would share with us a little bit about the generation of the musical. Where does, I always, we've talked about this over the years, it's fascinating to me. Where does the music come from? And what was it about the story that struck your hearts and made you decide you wanted to devote all of your artistic energy to its embodiment on stage? How did it?
I don't know, really. Yes, I don't know. It's called alchemy of collaboration, I think, is where things begin. And I will say, well, first of all, thank you for being in this room, and we're so happy to be here. And you know, it's just very moving to us to have this group of actors, this group of theater folks, this group of donors and participants in the Oslo. You know, we New York types, you know, get to come to lovely places such as this once in a while, and it's always a joy. And we're so happy to be here. The genesis of this project is this one to my left, our old and very dear friend Frank, and this is where inspiration comes from. To begin with, he loved the novel. He loved the play that had been adapted from the novel, he adapted the play itself into a shorter and more manageable form than the original three-act, I think it was 3 acts, right, play, into something that was sort of more contemporary and more doable today. And then it was as if he offered it to us like on a platter. He said, I wrote this, and just have a look, there might be music in it. And we said, oh, and this is after 22 years or something since we've done ragtime together, which was such a, my microphone off. Yeah. Now it's back on. Is it back on? I'm being sabotaged by Stephen.
Here, can I use this?
It's the Russian.
It's the Russian.
The Russian. Well, anyway, we read the play, we read the novel, and music erupted out of those sources. I am the humble lyricist. I'm sort of the bridge between music and book. So my job is to kind of weave Frank's beautiful prose and Stephen's beautiful music into song, and make the songs feel as if they were just nothing more than spoken dialogue, spoken language, but sung, so that everything is heightened emotionally. You know, they always say in a musical, when the character is too emotional to speak anymore, they burst into song. And my job is to sort of find those moments and work with Stephen to bring them to fruition. So, you know, that you're looking at a team of collaborators here who really, really love one another. Stephen and I have worked together since 1983. If you can believe that, I can't. And we're still standing after lots of shows, you know, and stuff. And, you know, with Frank, it's as if it never, as Michael said, it's as if we never stopped working. It's such a fluid, joy-filled, laughter-filled process. So much fun, and that's it. So I don't know, does that answer that question? Yeah.
Okay. The one thing that I thought was brilliant that Frank did, which really helped me find the music of the piece, and it's different from the original novel, it's different from the play adaptation, it's different from the movie adaptation. This is a memoir, it's a musical memoir, and it's a memory piece, and he actually, I don't know how he came up with this idea, but he added the character of the author, James A.G., who had written the original novel. He is a character in our play. And the minute that was in there, and James A.G. is sort of writing the evening as we're experiencing it, all of a sudden, that helped open the floodgates musically for me, because it was about his connection and his connecting the dots, which helps the audience connect the dots, and which frankly helped this composer to connect the dots. And all of a sudden it became this very fluid, really interesting, modern piece. So we're telling the story of one American family in 1915 in a very particular place, but we're also telling the story of a creative artist who is taking something that happened to himself and his family, trying to make sense of it, and trying to make something of beauty from what could be considered tragedy. And so all of a sudden, musically, I was like off at the races, and that was so cool. And I flew by a notion that I had to Frank early on. I said, I'm seeing this as a very casual score, like people almost on their front porches entertaining themselves, like we once used to do before, you know, the advent of every electronic device that we now rely on. And I said, I think it would be really cool if the actors also were musicians, and so when they're in a scene, they could enhance, you know, the next character's scene. And so that meant that we had to find people that could do so many different things. It really upped the difficulties for the casting. But I have to say, we found this extraordinary group of artists, and I can't wait for all of you to see all of the amazing things they can do, because it's a really cool, it's not like a pit orchestra and actors, it's sort of everybody pitching in evenly to tell this story, and it's going to be a really great production. So where does music come from? Honestly, I have no idea. But I'm glad it comes, and I just have faith that it will keep coming, and it seems to. So this has been a joy, and we're only on day one. So.
Thank you, Lynn and Stephen. Now I want to introduce two artists from the creative team who bring their immense talent to the moving and singing life of Knoxville. our choreographer, and musical stager Josh Rhodes, and our musical director Tom Murray. Maybe say something about what.
Yeah, first off, I have to say how happy I am to be here at Oslo for many reasons. One of the very first shows, I come originally from Chicago, which was the land of Steppenwolf, the land of ensemble theater. I mean, I grew up in theater doing ensemble theater, and this show just trips all those buttons. As Stephen was saying, the orchestra on stage being very much a part of the company, as the company is part of the orchestra, the music making. But one of my first professional shows in Chicago was with Peter Amster doing Once on This Island. And then not too long after that, I got to work with Frank and Steve doing a very esoteric piece on Gertrude Stein called Loving Repeating, which is an amazing piece. So it's a homecoming in a lot of ways. And I'm very happy that this is the first time I've ever gone to a meet and greet, and members of the orchestra are here as well. The music making of this piece is extremely important. And to underscore that, I kind of want to also let the board and development know if there's anything that I can do to open you up into how the music creation process happens, please let me know. Within the confines of management, what they need to do for the rehearsal room purposes and create a team. You know, I'd love to let you inside that process, not just for this show, but for how music theater works in general. Whenever I work regionally, I try to do that because a lot of the work that is done regionally, as you know nowadays, and as this piece is exemplified, is what ends up the rest of the country and the world seeing. This is the beginning of that process. So it's very important that a lot of the boards and developments start to understand the importance of music and music making in that genesis. Because Oslo is doing something more that is happening more and more now, which is creating a show, starting a show. And that's very important. And the music is called a musical, right? So the music is a very important ingredient of it. And I'm thrilled the way this show is coming together. And I just want to make sure that the board and development and all that understand it as well.
Great.
Hey everybody, who's geeking out about this room? Like, I mean, just think back. Last time you listened to Once on This Island or Ragtime, and the first time you saw Graves of Wrath, and you're in the room with these people. Pretty damn cool, right? Aren't we lucky? So I get the lucky job of being another collaborator in the storytelling in a musical that the word choreography might be a little confusing to some people because sometimes we think that choreography is kicking and turning, and it is that. And we were doing lots of that. No. But no, I'm very drawn to this piece and the challenge really of movement and fluidity because I think at the end of the day, my job is there's a crisis with this man, this author, who is being invaded by memory. And I think memory has a really funny way of sneaking up on you. And I think we drag around our ancestors with us all day long, and we're not aware of them until you see a perfectly creased white shirt, or a glass of whiskey, or you smell bacon. You know, there's something about our ancestors that are with us at all times, and they haunt us. And I think this piece is marvelous in that there's so much that's not spoken, and there's so many more questions than answers. And I think as a choreographer, that's a real wonderful thing for me to grab onto, because choreography doesn't always have to make sense. As we discovered in the workshop, that sometimes in a transition, if everybody is literally just at a doorway looking in to see if the baby is about to wake up or not, is in some ways enough of a peculiar image to believably understand that this author is gathering up information and moving on to the next piece. And so I'm sort of delighted that we actually have time, and I think this kind of choreography, whatever it is I'm talking about, poetry, visual poetry, whatever this is, I don't know if there's really a name for it, unfortunately, in our industry. Whatever it is, it only comes with time, and I'm just so grateful that we have another meditation together, that we all get to be here, and we all get to collaborate on this beautiful story with these beautiful authors. And so that is my challenge, and that is what I get to bring to the process. And actually, it's really my collaboration with the actors in some ways, because we'll all be doing it together. But it's what a wonderful gift to have. So thank you.
Oh, marvelous. Oh, yeah, okay. Before I introduce Bob Perziola, our scenery and costume designer, would you please permit me to say a few words about the story and its cultural context? Just briefly, I want to kind of cast the mind back to the decade when James A.G. wrote his great novel. James A.G.'s novel, A Death in the Family, was published in November of 1957. The author would have been 48 years old had he not suffered a heart attack in a taxi cab in New York City, where he died on May 16, 1955. He had been a successful journalist and film critic, a screenwriter, the African Queen, you may remember, poet, novelist. But the unfinished manuscript that he left behind would be considered his greatest work. Now, again, a little context. 6 years earlier, in 1951, The Catcher in the Rye was published. The teenage hero, Holden Caulfield, became an icon of his age. And it was the age of anxiety. It was also the beginning of the atomic age. The decade began when William Faulkner delivered his famous Nobel Prize acceptance speech at Stockholm City Hall on December 10th, 1950. So here's Faulkner. Ladies and gentlemen, I feel this award was not made to me as a man, but to my work, a life's work in the agony and sweat of the human spirit, not for glory, and least of all for profit, but to create out of the materials of the human spirit something which did not exist before. Faulkner goes on to assess the cultural zeitgeist while, and I have to say, I remember this myself. The memory of the war, World War II, is still fresh. And the smell of death still hangs over Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And Faulkner continues, our tragedy today in 1950 is a general and universal physical fear so long sustained by now that we can even bear it. There are no longer problems of the heart. There is only the question, when will I be blown up? Because of this, the young man or woman writing today has forgotten the problems of the human heart in conflict with itself, which alone can make good writing, because only that is worth writing about, worth the agony and the sweat. The basest of all things is to be afraid. Faulkner insists that the writer must leave no room in his workshop for anything but the old verities and truths of the heart. The old universal truths, lacking which any story is ephemeral and doomed. Love and honor and pity and pride and compassion and sacrifice. Without these, the writer labors under a curse. He writes not of love, but of lust, of defeats in which nobody loses anything of value, of victories without hope, and worst of all, without pity or compassion. His griefs grieve on no universal bones, leaving no scars. He writes not of the heart, but of the glands. I refuse to accept this. I decline to accept the end of man. It is easy enough to say that man is immortal simply because he will endure. That when the last ding-dong of doom has clanged and faded from the last worthless rock hanging tideless in the last red and dying evening, that even then there will be one more sound, that of his puny, inexhaustible voice, still talking. Faulkner's image of the unthinkable sounds like a Beckett play. The barren rock, the red sky, the single voice babbling. Well, sure enough, Waiting for Godot opened in Paris in the fall of 1952. So, you know, a little context, I think that's good, because it helps us nestle the roots of the story in the soil from which it grew. The age of anxiety, the fall of 52, the age of anxiety was in full cry. Salinger, you may not have known this, I didn't know it until I read this recent biography. Salinger saw combat on D-Day, and he was among the GIs who liberated Auschwitz. And he had his typewriter with him, and he was already working on Catcher in the Rye. As the gates opened and those atrocities were revealed. Holden Caulfield is filled with anxiety about his little sister's loss of innocence. He narrates his story from his shrink's couch. And James Rufus Agee of Knoxville, Tennessee, Harvard educated and suffering still from the trauma of losing his father at the age of 6, was called home on a warm spring day in 1955. His gentle heart throbbing with Faulkner's verities and truths, stopped the rat-a-tat-tat of its beating. But Knoxville remains, and it could be said that the novel is about the human heart in conflict with itself. Where do you locate a crisis of faith except in the heart? We take our design concept for this production from Faulkner's admonition to leave no room in his workshop. Workshop is the key word for a fiction that is not true. So our musical begins in 1955 in the author's workplace. Traffic noise blows in through the open window. Drunk and hunched over his typewriter, the author hears voices calling to him, calling him back to Knoxville, to live through it all again.
it's wonderful to be back here. I think this is my 4th time with the company. It's wonderful to be part of this wonderful team of Lynn, Stephen, and Frank. And I'm sorry to disappoint you, but I'm not going to talk about architecture or fashion because there's something deeper through this particular story, and maybe that's maybe that was one reason why I didn't want to get involved in it, because I think that when people exit this, our life, you're left with stuff, debris, memories, junk, papers, bills, photographs, and for those of us left behind, it's up to us to sort through it, process it, whatever you want to do, however you want to call it. And I think that for me, whether I like it or not, those people are with me. And I remember leaving college in Pittsburgh in my parents' house and saying, I'm going to be my own person, I will make my own decisions, and from this day forward. And then, years later, in my 50s, I find I'm acting like my father. And, he hasn't been with me for years. And so, I don't know, I'm talking a little nonsense, but that sort of undercurrent is what needs to be seen somehow visually, and so that's where I come in, and I try as best I can to do it. And I will be greatly assisted by this Broadway genius named Don Holder, who is not here, and the lighting designer. So.
Maybe by telling my story, I can find out who I am. That is what the author speculates as he remembers the last lost gentle man who seemed to keep so many secrets. But in looking for his father, James Agee discovers his mother. Laura Agee outlived her son. But while he lived, she was the dominant force in his life. Her grace and faith imbued her widowhood with courage and optimism. She was an Anglo-Catholic. Religion, prayer, and sacrifice were her modes of living. Her grief ennobled her. Nevertheless, it broke her son's heart to see her crushed and confused by this death in the family. And it broke her son's faith. These are conflicted hearts, and they are the subject of James Agee's deeply autobiographical novel. When the boy asks why his father is never coming home, his mother tells him, because God wanted him. But God is nowhere to be found. Pronounced dead by Nietzsche, the two Beckett tramps are waiting by the tree, but the featured act is a no-show. Agee, like Salinger, has seen the carnage, but the place in the soul where God lives is empty. This puts the crisis of faith at the center of the action. At the close of a poem from his Harvard days, I feel I shouldn't read all of this. A.G. is already brooding over the story of his own family. This was his entire life. He was always back there, always in his mind, always in his heart. And his poem is called Dedication. To those who died in sorrow and in kindness and in bravery, to those who died in violence suddenly, and to all that saw no death upon them, to those who died in the time of the joy of their strength, to all the dead in their generations, may they rest. So rested James A.G.'s novel until Lynn Ahrens and Stephen Flaherty sought to give it life with the breath of song and the depth of lyrical poetry. Thanks to Michael, to Linda, to everyone at the Oslo, our passionate supporters, and I acknowledge also the generous grant from the Roy Cochrane Foundation. Thanks to all of those individuals and efforts, a new musical begins its life here in this room. A matchless ensemble of theater artists. And here are two. Jason Daniely and Hannah Ellis. The author, James Rufus A.G., is remembering his mother, Mary, absorbing moments of profound loss. We conclude now with "in his strength."
It wasn't always the whiskey. He'd be gone for a night or a day or even two, and I'd know he hadn't touched a drop. And it wasn't any of the other things that come to a woman's mind either, in case you're thinking that. It was Market Square and all-night lunchrooms, country folk with old-time tales, Charlie Chaplin, locomotives, ragged men who ride the rails. It was going too fast and staying out late till the heart of the night moved in. But it's nothing that made him weak or bad.
strength.